Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. The Timberwolves beat the Nuggets on Monday night, snapping their six-game losing streak. Beat the best team in the West, the Denver Nuggets. We'll break down the win, what the Wolves did well, who played the best. Obviously, Ant in the second half was fantastic. We'll talk about Jaden McDaniels' great game, the job the Wolves did on Nikola Jokic. There's plenty to get to on the post-game pod. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Tuesday, everybody. This is a victory Tuesday as the Timberwolves beat the Denver Nuggets on Monday night by 13 points. Big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms and also the Locked On Sports Minnesota app that you can find on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and my account, which is at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. This is the postgame podcast. This is the happiest postgame podcast we've had here in a couple of weeks. The Wolves had a 6-game losing streak. I talked about on this very show on Monday. Actually, I talked about it in the live postcast with Marty Gellner of Valley Sports North on Saturday night following what hopefully it was the rock bottom loss to the Detroit Pistons. Actually, I don't know. We might have talked about this off the air after the postcast, but I also mentioned it on Monday's show. I thought that matchup against the Nuggets on Monday specifically was a sneakily decent chance for the Wolves to come out with a win against a team that they really should not have beaten. And that was before we knew who was playing and who wasn't. I said on Monday's show, I recorded it on Sunday afternoon, and I didn't know whether or not Jamal Murray was going to play in their game on Sunday against Boston. He did not play Sunday, and the Nuggets won, which implied that he probably would play Monday, because he wasn't going to play back-to-backs, right? He's been resting on back-to-backs this year. So Jamal Murray ends up playing, and the Wolves are without D'Angelo Russell. The Wolves are without Naz Reid, Russell with the non-COVID illness, and Naz with back spasms. So the Wolves are more shorthanded than I would have expected, or I did expect when I said the Wolves had a shot against the Nuggets. And the Nuggets are with Jamal Murray. So things easily could have flipped back the other way. But Denver traveling on the second night of a back-to-back, they had that delay due to the uneven rim in Denver on Sunday. So they got in like at 3 a.m. or something on Monday. And the travel, it showed for Denver. This certainly wasn't a blowout by any means. It was closer than the 13-point final deficit. This was pretty much a 2-3 possession game for most of it. The Wolves did lead most of the way. But for me, this was, first of all, it was predictable the Wolves could get up for this game after losing to the worst team in the league on Saturday. They then take on the best team in the West on Monday. On the second night of a back-to-back for Denver, rest advantage for Minnesota at home since Saturday night's loss. They had the players-only meeting after the game on Saturday. There's all this stuff about hey, is the season over? Is this rock bottom? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This team has gotten up for the big games. Good or bad, which I guess that's good. What's frustrating is that they play to their competition, right? They get up for these games. They played bad against a shorthanded Miami team a week ago. They played bad against the worst team in the league in Detroit on Saturday, but they beat Denver on Monday. And even going back last week, they played Zion to a tough 1-point game on Wednesday, a really good Pelicans team on the road. And Friday, they're competitive against Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks, one of the best teams in the league. So it's like these guys are playing hard against the good teams mostly. Kind of mailing it in against the bad teams. And it all added up to a 6-game losing streak coming into Monday. But my biggest takeaway from this game is they executed the game plan. That's it, really. Look at what they did early in the game. I talked about on the preview show on Monday's episode, that Denver's a bad perimeter defense team. They're bottom 5 in the league overall by any defensive metric. One of their biggest issues is perimeter defense. Aaron Gordon, a pretty good one-on-one defender. Michael Porter Jr. has flashes, but consistently, they're not a good perimeter defense team. And they don't block a ton of shots in the paint. It's just they have some of these, like coming in, it seemed like the Wolves should be able to straight line drive to the basket and beat these guys off the dribble. And they did that early. The Nuggets were struggling to stay in front of Anthony Edwards. They were struggling. Now, Ant didn't score early in the game at all. He didn't score at all in the first quarter. But in general, the Wolves were getting penetration, drive and kick. Karl-Anthony, of all people, was getting penetration. I mean, he typically does in his own kind of slow motion way. But Denver had to play a lot of zone, and then Kyle Anderson was picking the zone apart, and then eventually it was Ant as we got into the third quarter. Ant had 15 of his 29 in the third quarter. He had 23 by the end of the third and then scored 6 in the fourth. But this was a progression over the course of the game of Denver said, oh, shoot, we can't guard the Wolves on the perimeter. We'll go to zone. Then Kyle Anderson picks the zone apart. Jaden McDaniels is hitting open threes and driving and shooting 9 of 10 from the field for McDaniels in just 25 minutes. And the Wolves offensively made the Nuggets move their feet. They moved the ball from side to side. They took advantage of the advantageous matchups when they got them, whether it was Ant or McDaniels or Kyle Anderson or Jalen Noel, who got the start in the absence of D'Angelo Russell in this game. So the Wolves executed that game plan, and that the ball movement was effective. They got the ball to the players they wanted to have the ball in the matchups they wanted to be in. And then when the Nuggets switched to zone, the Wolves figured out a way to beat that zone, which has been such a big issue earlier this season. But the Wolves did a good job against it in this game. And then in the second half, it was time for Ant to take over. It was time for Jalen Noel to hit a couple of key buckets after struggling early. And this team just kind of like, the Nuggets kept coming back, right? Denver was within 2 with about 5.5 minutes to play. They were within 4 with like 3 minutes to play. And the Wolves just like, even though Denver kept coming back, this wasn't, it's not typical of this year's of any Wolves team in recent memory, right? Where they handle these runs well. And the Wolves did that in this game. I thought they were really, really good with handling Denver's runs late. And that's because they had figured out how to attack offensively over the course of the game. And they just kept going back to that. And it worked down the stretch. On the other end of the floor, the Wolves also executed the game plan. Yeah, Denver scored 111. Yeah, they shot 46%, 38% from 3. They got to the line 20 times. So, the numbers are okay for Denver, but the Wolves made them work. The Wolves made Joker work for his 24, 9, and 7. He had 5 turnovers in this game. Jokic did. He had 1 assist at halftime. He had 8 in the second half. And Denver did have the third quarter surge. They did take a lead early in the fourth quarter, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, this thing was close. This was a close game. But the Wolves did an outstanding job on Jokic in the first half and a good enough job on him in the second half that they were able to retake that lead. And the game plan was just kind of muck things up, be physical as much as possible. Kyle Anderson did a pretty good job on Jokic, especially in the first half. McDaniels was in a little bit of foul trouble, but ultimately when he was on the floor was very good. Luka Garza off the bench did a good job when he was asked to guard Jokic. Again, just being physical and like I said, mucking things up, make things convoluted as much as possible. Jamal Murray had no points in the first half. They made him work. He pretty much did his only damage in the third quarter. It was really just like a couple of mini Bones Highland runs where the Wolves didn't contest his 3-point attempts well enough. He had I think a couple of like bursts in one in the first half, one in the second half that were dangerous. But other than that, for the most part, the Nuggets had to work for what they got. And Aaron Gordon shot 4 of 18, 0 of 3 from outside the arc. The only players that shot well from deep for the Nuggets were Porter and Highland. So the Wolves did a good job defensively, being physical, making things difficult on Jokic. There were a couple of runs, even besides the Bones Highland ones, where the Wolves kind of like faux double teamed Jokic that wasn't really effective, where, and this was primarily third quarter, right? When the Nuggets made their run, and early fourth quarter was the Wolves would have like a player guarding Jokic, and then Rudy Gobert kind of shadow double where he comes like 2/3 of the way there. But like Jokic is a good enough passer. He's obviously going to find the baseline cutter. He's going to find the guy in the dunker spot. He's going to throw the lob, like whatever it is. That wasn't effective. And I doubt that was the game plan. I think that was just the wrong positioning for Gobert and others who tried it. But for the most part, I thought they executed the game plan well. They had a good game plan to make things difficult on Denver. I want to dive into a couple of other aspects of this game that I thought were really good for the Wolves. Some of the areas that they've really struggled in this season that they were much better in this particular game. So I want to get into that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. If you took, Aaron Gordon rebounds over, he had 16 boards in this game, you would have been great over at Prize Picks. If you'd taken Anthony Edwards points over, you would have been in good shape as well. Prize Picks is a ton of fun. If you're wondering how it works, I'll tell you. You just pick 2 to 6 players if they'll score more or less than their Prize Pick projection. And it's not just points. You can do rebounds, assists, field goals made, three-pointers made, steals, etc. And you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. They offer projections on any sport that you watch. This includes the NFL, the NBA, of course, NHL, college sports, and you can cross sports. You could do like a, Thursday night football plus Thursday night NBA on TNT, cross sport projections. It's a ton of fun. You can make your entries in less than 60 seconds. It really is that easy. Simply download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, they'll give you $100. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, a couple additional takeaways from this game. So some of the issues I've on the show harped on for the Wolves, and I guess like it's not just me. These are obvious issues, right? I like to think I have some original analysis here, but it's pretty obvious. The Wolves have been a terrible rebounding team this season. It's pretty obvious they've been really bad on the defensive glass, especially. They've turned the ball over too much at times. They've struggled to defend the three-point line at times. Those are kind of some of the fast break defense, which actually wasn't great in this game either. But for the most part, they competed well in each of those areas. So like, for instance, Denver did have 18 offensive rebounds in this game, but the Wolves overall were only a -4 on the glass in this game. They were competitive on the offensive glass themselves. Nate Knight was really good off the bench on the offensive glass. He missed a couple of bunnies at the rim, but actually both teams missed shots in the restricted area, within 3 feet of the basket pretty frequently in this game. Both teams shot the ball poorly right around the rim, but the Wolves were competitive with the offensive glass themselves, which helped offset a little bit some of the offensive rebounds that Denver got. Also it was just kind of Aaron Gordon, playing patty cake at a couple of points in the game too. And he ultimately shot 4 of 18. So exhibit A for shooting the ball poorly in the restricted area, Aaron Gordon. But still, overall, they were competitive on the glass and they played hard. And Marnie and I talked about this in tonight's postcast, or Monday night's postcast as well, which, by the way, if you're listening, if you're not on YouTube, if you're listening to the audio feed, the episode before this is the live postcast with Marnie. And if you are on YouTube, you can hop over to the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel and find that video from Marnie and I last night. But the overall competitiveness of the Timberwolves, the activity level, even if they gave up 18 offensive rebounds, they were only a -4 overall on the glass. And there was actually some resistance for Denver. I mean, how many of these games, like Saturday against Detroit is the most recent and most obvious example, where the Wolves just weren't competitive on the glass, 4 guys standing around, the ball drops in the middle and the other team gets the ball. That didn't happen in this game. And part of that, honestly, I don't want to get into the whole, hey, look who didn't play in this game thing, because we'll see how Wednesday goes if some of these guys are back. And I don't mean Nas. I mean D'Angelo Russell. I don't want to get into that yet, because I don't know that that's fair in this situation, because D'Angelo Russell wasn't the only guy on the floor on Saturday, right? There were plenty of guys that weren't going after loose balls and weren't getting rebounds on the defensive end of the floor and weren't competitive on 50-50 balls or just in general throughout that game. That wasn't just D'Angelo Russell. But in this game, look at some of the guys who did play. Nate Knight, Luka Garza, those guys are always going after loose balls. They're always going after potential rebounds. Those guys compete, and they both played well in this game. They both rebounded the basketball. Garza had 6 rebounds in 14 minutes. Nate Knight had 8 rebounds in 22 minutes, and they were Anthony Edwards actually led the Wolves in rebounds in this game with 10. Knight and Garza each played less minutes than Rudy Gobert. They each played less minutes than Kyle Anderson, who were both front court starters for the Wolves in this game. Less minutes than Jaden McDaniels, who was a front court starter in this game for the Wolves. And yet Knight and Garza each individually out-rebounded all 3 of those guys. They all out-rebounded. Knight had 8 boards in 22 minutes. Garza had 6 in 14 minutes. McDaniels, Anderson, Gobert all had 4 rebounds, and they all played between 25 and 31 minutes individually. So Knight and Garza were a huge part of this. And I really want to shout them out. They're not going to get studs and duds mentions in this game. They didn't have a big enough role, and the starters played well in general too. But those guys were impactful off the bench. So this takeaway is specific to rebounding and the competitiveness overall, the competition level that the Wolves brought to this game, which was a very welcome change of pace. But also Knight and Garza specifically were extremely good off the bench. And I will continue to beat the Nate Knight drum. Nate Knight needs to be getting rotation minutes in the NBA. Like he's a rotation guy. I'm not saying he's a starter. I'm not saying he's a superstar. I'm saying that he's an 18, 20 plus minute per game guy, potentially a 7th, 8th man in a rotation that can play the 4, play the 5. You know, he's got some holes defensively, but he's kind of a jack of all trades, even if he is a master of none. But he will always play hard. Like there's a little bit of Jared Vanderbilt to his game in terms of his motor, right? But he's got better touch, obviously, offensively. He's certainly not the defender that Jared Vanderbilt was, and obviously can't defend on the perimeter like Vando could guard most positions. He was pretty much able to guard 2 through 4 on the perimeter, for the most part. Knight can't do that. But in terms of motor, rebounding ability, and he's a better offensive player, like Nate Knight needs to find his way onto the floor more often for Minnesota. And like, I feel like I could do a whole segment on this, but that's my 2 cents. And I don't know, go back and listen to everything I said after the Bulls game, everything I said after the Thunder game. And anytime I get to any chance I get to talk about Nate Knight, I'll talk about Nate Knight. He needs to play more. So Knight and Garza, very good off the bench for the Wolves in this game. Rebounding, very good. The Wolves were at +3 in the turnover category. They only turned it over 11 times in this game. Fast break, offense wasn't outstanding. The fast break defense wasn't outstanding. And the Nuggets will take what you give them, right? Like if you allow them to run on you, they'll run on you. And the Wolves should have been better in that area. That was kind of the one area that they typically struggle in, that they also struggled in this game. But for the most part, the Wolves guarded the 3-point line decently. We talked about that a little bit already. They shot the ball well from 3 themselves. They actually out free throwed their opponents, which hasn't happened in a while. They were a +7 in terms of attempts and shot a similar percentage to Denver at the free throw line, which was huge. So a lot of these categories that have been problems for Minnesota, they were good. Oh, points in the paint. That's another one. I said this a minute ago, neither team shot the ball well in the paint or within the restricted area, but the Wolves were competitive in the paint. I believe they were a +4. I'm going to make sure I got that number right. They were +4 in the paint. And this is a team like Jokic and his passing, hitting cutters and all that stuff, and Gordon in the paint. Like these guys typically do very well around the basket. And the Wolves at least were contesting shots. And to be clear, Denver missed some bunnies, but like there were possessions where McDaniels and Garza and others were walling up in the paint, hands straight up in the air, doing a great job at defending without fouling and just being a body, throwing some sort of an obstacle in the way to keep Denver from making easy baskets, from getting easy points at the rim. And like, that's a simple thing, but it's a thing that the Wolves don't do a lot of the time. And they did it in this game. And like, that translates to ultimately what was a 13-point win. But like, this is a close game down the stretch and every bucket matters. And the Wolves were competitive in the paint. Again, not a thing we've been able to say frequently this season. Okay, I want to close with individual studs and duds, as I always do. There's a couple guys we haven't talked enough about yet, frankly, that played really well for the Wolves in the starting lineup. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, sports betting stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every pro and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season, which is, of course, now we're in the college football playoffs, so we just have the championship game next week. I believe that's the last game. Of course, it's the last game. There's, NHL, really any collegiate college basketball. We're in the middle of conference play. The Gophers are in conference play right now. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Go check out and see what the Wolves line is at home against Portland on Wednesday. I haven't looked yet, but I'm interested to see. Obviously, it depends a little bit on who's playing, but that's going to be I'm guessing maybe Portland by 1.5. Like, that should be a close line, I think, on Wednesday, Wolves Blazers. Head to the website today. Again, it's betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds from Wolves Nuggets. Number one has to be Anthony Edwards. 29, 10, and 5 in this game, 10 of 24 from the floor, and he was only 3 of 11 outside the arc. So inside the arc, he was 7 of 13, so above 50% on twos. And of course, most of that was around the rim. I guess he's been shooting a little bit more from mid-range lately. 6 of 6 at the free throw line. Another game where he should have gotten to the line more often. By the way, great to see him making all of his free throws. That's been an issue of late for Ant, uncharacteristically over the past couple of weeks here, is making free throws. But he should have gotten to the line more often. He also should have complained less. Like, both things can be true, right? He complains too much and it to the detriment of his team, but he also should be getting more foul calls. Like, what are we like? It's ridiculous. The number of calls that Ant does not get, but I also think it's a little bit like Towns where there's fatigue from the refs of hearing these guys complain too much, fair or unfair. You got to be aware of it. Anyway, I don't want to detract from this. It was a good game for Ant. 29, 10, and 5. Only 3 turnovers, which was good for as much as he had the ball in his hands. I didn't say this. I mean, I said no D'Angelo Russell, but like I didn't belabor this point maybe as much as I should have off the top of the show. No point guards in uniform for the Timberwolves in this game. Like Jalen Noel and Anthony Edwards are running your offense for the majority of the game. Austin Rivers ran some off the bench. He actually played 32 minutes off the bench. Rivers did, and played well overall. So I don't know. No point guards. Like that's pretty good. Kyle Anderson, actually, I should point out, well, we'll get to Kyle Anderson here in a minute, but he ran some offense too. So great game from Ant. And I said 15 points in the third quarter. He had no points like up through the midway point of the second quarter, 15 in the third alone, finishes with 29 on 24 shots, and was great when the Wolves needed him as the Nuggets were making those pushes in the third and fourth quarter. Ant was the primary source of offense for Minnesota. And I thought he did a good job picking his spots. It wasn't straight like ISO, I'm going to do this because I'm going to do it type of basketball. It was opportunistic. I thought it was intelligent. I thought it was well-timed for the most part. Like I thought Ant played really well. Jaden McDaniels is the next stud, 21 points on 10 shots. Find me more efficient Jaden McDaniels game. I don't think there is one ever, has been at any point in his 2+ years in the league. 21 points on 9 of 10 shooting, a perfect 2 of 2 outside the arc, 1 of 2 at the free throw line, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal and a block, tied for the team lead in plus minus with a plus 13. Fantastic on both ends of the floor. A little bit of foul trouble kept him to only 25 minutes. He played only 25 minutes, but had 21 points. I don't know this for sure, but I'd be shocked if he had over 20 points in any game ever in his career where he played less than 30 minutes. This was as efficient as it gets, really, for almost anybody, but especially for Jaden McDaniels. Really great all-around game. Good activity level, solid as a cutter, like relatively active. Had a couple of nice drives himself where he just straight line drove to the basket, got a layup. More of that, please, from Jaden McDaniels. I feel like I've said this 5, 6, 7 times after games this season. It's at least more frequent than it was last year, but it's not quite to the frequency level that the Wolves need him to be, especially with as many guys missing as are currently. If we were getting more of this from McDaniels with Towns out, I think we'd be talking about a record better than 17 and 21. But here we are. Kyle Anderson's my third stud in this game, 19 and 8 plus 3 steals for Anderson. He initiated a ton of offense. I mentioned him earlier in the show, I think first segment, about picking apart the zone defense. And Slow-Mo is so great at getting into the middle, the soft spots of the zone around the elbows, kind of that 10-foot mark, like kind of between the circle or between the restricted area and the hash below the free throw line, like the dotted line. Like just really good at getting there, finding cutters, finding shooters, distributing, being smart with the ball. And he plays at his own pace, right? That's the whole thing with Slow-Mo is he can get his shot off wherever, however he wants. He made a couple crazy, weird shots in this game, but he can also pass the ball as well as anybody. 19 and 8, only 1 turnover in 31 minutes. Plus, had the 8 assists and also, again, the 3 steals, 6 of 12 shooting, 3 of 4 outside the arc. We're seeing a Kyle Anderson shooting clinic so far this season. And I hope and pray that it does not, we don't see a regression to the career averages for Kyle Anderson. A perfect 4 of 4 at the line, 19 points on 12 shots. This is kind of a souped up, perfect Slow-Mo game, in my opinion. So fantastic game from Kyle Anderson. And I mentioned that Noel and Edwards were the backcourt. Well, Kyle Anderson initiated a ton, especially when the Nuggets were in zone. I thought he was fantastic. I only have 3 studs, but I do want to shout out the bench. I talked a lot about Knight and Garza earlier. Matt Ryan was solid in his 21 minutes. He's still got to shoot the ball better from 3. Like if you're going to call plays for a 3-point shooter, you got to make the 3-point shots, right? And the Wolves are trying to get Matt Ryan into a groove. Clearly, this guy must be incredible in practice because everybody talks about his release and his footwork and all this stuff coming on his screens. And like, if they could find like a a version of that type of a shooter. And obviously that's what they're trying to do with Ryan, but he's got to make those shots in games. Just 1 of 4 outside the arc in this game. I thought he was okay though. Austin Rivers 8 and 5 in 32 minutes. All 5 of his shot attempts were from beyond the arc. He made 2 of them and 5 assists to no turnovers. So like you combine Anderson and Rivers, the 2 vets that operated a lot as basically point guards in this game, they combined for 13 assists and 1 turnover. Take that. Who needs a point guard, right? Don't quote me on that on Wednesday if D'Lo doesn't play Wednesday and the Wolves lose. But overall, no issues getting into the offense in this game. 124 points. Again, the Nuggets, despite the fact the Nuggets are a good team, I want to be really clear. They're a bad defensive team. So, like, I'm not doing laps about the Wolves offense yet because it's been 1 game, first of all. And second of all, because the Nuggets are a bad defensive team. I just thought the Wolves did enough defensively and did their part offensively to beat a bad defensive team in Denver. Denver's still a good team overall, and this is a good win for Minnesota. I don't want to take away from that. There's no duds in this game. I thought everyone played well. Rudy had a quieter game because of foul trouble. He had 8 points, 4 rebounds, only 3 shot attempts, 3 assists, a couple of blocks. One that was called a goaltend that definitely, I don't think was a goaltend. So it could have been 3 blocks, but I thought it was a good Rudy game when he was on the floor. Just, foul trouble got him a little bit. Continues to be quiet offensively for the Wolves. They tried to force the ball to him. I think actually Kyle Anderson's only turnover was a lob he tried to throw to Rudy, who had like one arm pinned down, and he tried to like throw it. Rudy tried to one-hand catch it. It was a dumb pass by Anderson, but it was just an example. The Wolves trying to force it to Rudy and get him going. It didn't quite work, but not a dud. It was a fine performance from Gobert, besides the foul trouble. That's really it on this game. We'll, of course, the Wolves take on Portland at home on Wednesday. We've got a Wednesday show. We'll preview that game on tomorrow's show, Wednesday show, among other things. And then Portland Wednesday. And then things don't get easier. They have the Clippers Friday before Saturday off, Sunday against Houston. So it gets a little more. The Wolves have to win one of the next 2, right? They have to. I said this on Monday's show. They got to win 2 out of 3 of this homestand, or I should say, 2 out of 3 of the remaining games after the Detroit loss. Portland Wednesday is obviously the easier of the 2 games, but they struggle with Portland. They lost twice to them on the road about 3 weeks ago, and Dame dominated against the Wolves. So that'll be a tough game. And then the Clippers Friday. So anyway, we'll do the live postcast after both games. We'll preview those matchups, and then we'll also have a show on Thursday as well, as we always do. So a big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. You can watch on YouTube. You can listen on all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen to Game-to-Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. It includes yours truly, a 60-second recap, essentially, of the game. The things you won't see in the box score in a lot of cases from our hosts. So make sure to check out the Game-to-Game podcast. You can follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.